16 years ago, this exact stadium watched Mexico fall apart on the world's biggest stage. Today, I sat in section 214 and watched them rewrite that story, but not without chaos. 9 minutes in, the net was already shaking. By halftime, a 35-year-old striker who almost lost his career to a head injury was about to have the moment of his life. And then, 3 red cards, 3, the most ever in a World Cup opener. If you think you know how this story ends, you don't. Let me take you inside it. I landed in Mexico City 3 days before the match, and even then the city already felt different. Not louder, exactly. Mexico City is never quiet but charged, like the air right before a storm breaks. Every taxi driver wanted to talk about El Tri. Every street vendor had a Mexico jersey draped over their cart alongside the usual tacos and elote. Kids were kicking footballs against walls painted with murals of Hugo Sanchez, Rafael Marquez, and newer additions, Raúl Jiménez and Edson Alvarez. I'd flown in not just as a fan, but as someone who'd been chasing this tournament for years. The 2026 World Cup wasn't just another edition. It was the first one ever shared by 3 nations, the United States, Canada, and Mexico, and the first to feature 48 teams instead of 32. Everything about it felt bigger, heavier, more important. But for Mexico, this tournament carried something else too, a weight, a history. And if you know anything about Mexican football, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Mexico has hosted the opening match of the World Cup before. They've played in it, too, 8 times now, including this one. And every single time before today, it had gone wrong. 5 losses, 2 draws, 0 wins. The most painful of those was 2010, when Mexico opened the tournament against the host nation, South Africa, and could only manage a 1-1 draw in a match everyone expected them to dominate. Now, 16 years later, the football gods, or maybe just the fixture computer in Zurich, had decided to serve up the exact same opponent for the opening match of the 2026 World Cup. Mexico versus South Africa, again, at Estadio Azteca, again. I remember sitting in my hotel room the night before, scrolling through old footage of that 2010 opener, watching the disappointment on the faces of Mexican fans as the final whistle blew on a draw nobody wanted. I wondered, would tonight be a repeat, or would it be a redemption? I didn't sleep much that night. I don't think anyone in Mexico City did. The morning of June 11, 2026, I woke up before my alarm. Sunlight was already creeping through the curtains, and I could hear chanting from the street below, not organized chants, just groups of fans, already in their green jerseys, already singing, already 6 hours before kickoff. I threw on my own jersey, green, obviously, even though I'm not Mexican, because when you're at a World Cup opener in Mexico City, you don't wear neutral colors. You pick a side, or the city picks it for you. The walk to Estadio Azteca is something I'll never forget. The stadium sits in the Tlalpan and Coyoacan area, and as you get closer, the streets start to narrow with people. Vendors selling everything from green and white face paint to tiny plastic trumpets. Families with kids on their shoulders. Grandparents in wheelchairs being pushed through the crowd by grandchildren, all of them wearing the same jersey, different generations, same dream. And then there was the stadium itself. Estadio Azteca isn't just a stadium, it's a monument. It hosted the 1970 World Cup final, the one where Pelé and Brazil produced arguably the greatest team performance in football history. It hosted the 1986 final too, the one where Diego Maradona dragged Argentina to glory almost single-handedly. And now, in 2026, it was about to become the first stadium in the history of the Men's World Cup to host matches across 3 different tournaments. Walking toward those famous concrete ramps, I genuinely got goosebumps. I wasn't even Mexican, and I felt like I was walking into something sacred. Outside the stadium, There was already a stage set up, and screens were playing highlights from 1970 and 1986 on a loop. Every time Pelé's face appeared, the crowd around me would point and cheer, like he was about to walk out himself. I found my seat about 90 minutes before kickoff, and the stadium was already two-thirds full. Just sitting there, soaking it in, I realized this wasn't just a football match. This was a cultural event. This was history about to happen, and I had a front-row seat to it. I want to take a moment here because what happened before kickoff deserves its own chapter. As the stadium filled to capacity, over 87,000 people, by the way, the loudest quiet hum I've ever experienced, like a beehive the size of a small city, the lights dimmed, and the opening ceremony began. This wasn't just any opening ceremony. This was the first of 3 opening ceremonies for this World Cup, one for each host nation. Mexico City got to go first, and they clearly wanted to make a statement. The show began with a tribute to Mexican history and culture, dancers in traditional dress representing different regions of the country, drummers performing rhythms that echoed off the stadium's upper tiers, and then Shakira. I'm not exaggerating when I say the entire stadium shook. Shakira performed Die Die, the official song of this World Cup, which she recorded alongside Burna Boy. Even without Burna Boy physically present, the crowd sang every word back at her like it had been the anthem of their childhood for decades, even though it had only been released months earlier. Then came Maná, a Mexican rock band that's been a soundtrack to this country's identity for over 30 years. Watching tens of thousands of people, many of whom were probably alive for Maná's earliest albums, singing along with their kids and grandkids. It hit different. And then, almost unbelievably, Andrea Bocelli walked out. The Italian tenor, performing on a stage in the middle of a football pitch, his voice somehow cutting clean through all that noise, all that energy, and creating this strange moment of stillness in the middle of chaos. But the moment that made the entire stadium erupt, louder than any of the musical performances, was when Salma Hayek walked onto the stage. Nobody had announced her. Nobody expected her. And when the cameras caught her face on the big screen, you'd have thought Mexico had already scored a goal. There was also a beautiful, quieter moment that I almost missed amid all the spectacle. A Mexican-American songwriter named Lila Downs came out and welcomed everyone, not just in Spanish and English, but in Mixtec and Nahuatl, 2 indigenous languages of Mexico. In a stadium full of noise and lights and global superstars, that moment of cultural acknowledgement felt like the heart of the whole ceremony. By the time the players walked out for the anthems, I genuinely didn't think my heart rate could go any higher. I was wrong. 13:00 local time. June 11, 2026. The first whistle of the 23rd FIFA World Cup. Mexico, managed by Javier Aguirre, lined up in front of their home crowd with the weight of history pressing down on every player's shoulders. South Africa, Bafana Bafana, lined up across from them, 16 years removed from their own home World Cup, where they'd held Mexico to that infamous 1-1 draw. From the very first whistle, you could feel that Mexico wanted this differently than they had in 2010. There was no hesitation, no nerves visible on the pitch, even if I'm sure every player felt them. Within the first 5 minutes, Mexico had already created a clear chance. The crowd around me, people who, just moments earlier, had been hugging strangers during the national anthem, were now on their feet, screaming at every touch near the South African box. And then, in the 9th minute, it happened. South Africa had the ball deep in their own defensive third, their own goal, basically, the most dangerous place on the pitch to make a mistake, and they made one. A loose pass, a moment of hesitation, and suddenly the ball was at the feet of Julián Quiñones. I want to be honest with you. From where I was sitting, high up in section 214, I couldn't see the exact details of the build-up. What I saw was a flash of green, a shot, and then the net moving. Goal. I have been to football matches before. I have celebrated goals before, but I have never experienced anything like the noise that erupted from 87,000 people inside Estadio Azteca in that moment. It wasn't just noise, it was physical. I felt the air pressure change. I felt the metal seats vibrate beneath me. Strangers were hugging strangers. A man next to me, who I hadn't exchanged a single word with for the entire pre-match build-up, grabbed my shoulders and shook me, screaming something in Spanish I couldn't fully understand but didn't need to. 9 minutes. 9 minutes into their first-ever World Cup win in an opening match, and Mexico already had the lead. Julián Quiñones, a name a lot of casual fans probably didn't know before this tournament, had just given his country the perfect start. What followed wasn't quite what I expected. After that early goal, I think a lot of us in the stadium expected Mexico to come flying forward, looking for a second, a third, maybe even running away with the game in the first half. Instead, what we got was something more nervy: Mexico controlling possession, South Africa sitting deeper, looking to absorb pressure and hit on the counter. Quiñones, riding the high of his early goal, almost doubled Mexico's lead in the 42nd minute. He struck a shot that beat the South African goalkeeper completely, only for it to crash off the post and bounce away. The groan from the crowd was almost as loud as the cheer for the goal had been. So close. Then, just moments later, Quiñones turned provider, setting up Brian Gutierrez with a chance that, from my vantage point, looked like it had to go in. It didn't. The chance went begging, and the half ended with Mexico leading 1-0, deserved, but not as comfortable as the dominant possession stats probably suggested. During halftime, I struck up a conversation with the man next to me, the one who'd nearly dislocated my shoulder during the goal celebration. His name was Arturo, and he told me he'd been at the 2010 opener too. He told me about the heartbreak of that 1-1 draw, about how he'd left Azteca that day feeling like Mexico had wasted a golden opportunity in front of their own fans. "Today is different," he told me in broken English mixed with Spanish. "Today we don't draw, today we win." I nodded, but honestly in the back of my mind I was thinking about all the times football had punished confidence like that. One goal is never enough. Not really. Not until the final whistle. I had no idea just how dramatic the second half was about to get. The second half began, and almost immediately the tension in the stadium ratcheted up. South Africa, needing a response, pushed bodies forward. For the first time in the match, I felt genuine nervousness ripple through the crowd around me, the kind of silence that falls over 87,000 people when they sense something could go wrong. Then, in the 49th minute, it did, but not for Mexico. Brian Gutierrez, the same player who'd been denied a goal just before halftime, found himself breaking clear on goal after a beautifully lofted pass split the South African defense. He was through. 1-on-1. The kind of chance that, if scored, puts a game to bed. South African midfielder Sfefilo Sithole made a split-second decision. He wasn't going to let Gutierrez get a shot off, no matter the cost. He brought him down, not violently, but deliberately, cynically, exactly the kind of foul referees are coached to punish severely. The referee didn't hesitate. Out came the red card. The stadium exploded again, but this time, it wasn't a goal celebration. It was that specific roar a crowd makes when they sense the game has just been decided, even if the scoreline hasn't changed yet. Sithole trudged off the pitch, and South Africa were down to 10 men, already a goal behind with over 40 minutes still to play. I turned to Arturo, half expecting him to be celebrating. Instead, he just nodded slowly, like a man who'd seen enough football to know that nothing is ever truly settled, not even an early goal and a one-man advantage. He was right to be cautious, because that red card, it was only the first of 3. In the 67th minute, the moment that I'll remember most from this entire match happened. Mexico, now with a numerical advantage and a goal lead, won a corner. The delivery was good, high, looping, aimed toward the back post. And there, rising above everyone else, met it with a free header, was Raúl Jiménez. The ball hit the back of the net, and for a split second, the stadium seemed to take a collective breath before erupting. 2-0 Mexico. But here's why this goal mattered so much more than just the scoreline. Raúl Jiménez is 35 years old. Back in 2020, while playing in the English Premier League, he suffered a horrific head injury. A fractured skull, the kind of injury that ends careers. The kind of injury that for a while made people wonder if he'd ever play professional football again, let alone represent his country at a World Cup. And here he was, on home soil in the opening match of a World Cup his country was co-hosting, scoring his first-ever FIFA World Cup goal. From where I was sitting, I could see him on the big screen, and he was in tears. Not the kind of forced, performative tears some players do for the cameras. Real tears. The kind that come from years of doubt, recovery, frustration, and hope, all releasing in one single moment. I'll admit it, I got emotional too, and I didn't even know who Raúl Jiménez was a week earlier. But you didn't need to know his backstory to feel the weight of that moment. You could see it on his face, on the faces of his teammates as they ran to embrace him, and on the faces of the fans around me, many of whom clearly knew exactly what this moment meant. Arturo turned to me, and this time he wasn't cautious anymore. "That," he said, pointing at the screen, "that is why we love this game. You'd think that after a 2-0 lead and a numerical advantage, the drama would settle down. This match had other plans." As the second half wore on, South Africa, frustrated, down a man, down 2 goals, and increasingly desperate, began to unravel. In the chaos that followed, South African midfielder Thembazwane picked up his own red card, compounding South Africa's misery and leaving them with 9 men on the pitch. I remember the stadium reacting with a strange mixture of disbelief and dark humor at this point. Fans around me were laughing, shaking their heads, saying things like, "This is unbelievable," in multiple languages. 9 men. 9 in a World Cup match. That doesn't happen often. But then, and this part genuinely surprised everyone in the stadium, Mexico's own Cesar Montes was also shown a red card in the second half. Suddenly, what had started as a comfortable Mexican advantage had turned into a bizarre, lopsided spectacle. By the time all the dust settled, this match had produced 3 red cards, the most ever shown in a World Cup opening match in the history of the tournament. I later found out that the only other time a World Cup opener had seen 3 straight red cards was back in 1998, and South Africa had been involved in that one too, against Denmark. There's something almost poetic in a chaotic way about South Africa being at the center of historic red card drama in World Cup openers, 28 years apart. Sitting there, watching players trudge off one after another, I kept thinking, this is not how anyone scripted this match. The opening game of the biggest World Cup in history, and it was turning into one of the most chaotic, card-strewn matches I'd ever witnessed in person. Despite all the chaos, the red cards, the missed chances, the emotional roller coaster, the result never really felt in doubt after Jimenez's goal. Mexico controlled what they needed to control, saw out the closing stages, and when the referee finally blew the final whistle, the scoreline read. And just like that, 16 years of history had been rewritten. Mexico, who had played in 7 previous World Cup openers and never won a single one, 5 losses, 2 draws, had finally broken the curse. And they'd done it against the very team that had denied them in 2010. The celebrations inside Azteca were unlike anything I'd experienced. Fireworks, confetti, players doing a lap of the pitch, applauding every section of the stadium. Raúl Jiménez, still visibly emotional, being mobbed by teammates and staff alike. I sat there for a long time after the final whistle, even as people around me started filing out. I wasn't ready to leave. I wanted to hold onto that feeling, the noise, the emotion, the sense that I had just witnessed something that mattered, not just for football, but for an entire country's relationship with this tournament. The walk back from the stadium was completely different from the walk in. Earlier, there had been nervous energy, anticipation, a kind of collective holding of breath. Now the streets were pure celebration. Green flares, drums, strangers dancing together, cars honking in rhythm with chants of May Roman 11 Co., May Roman 11 Co. I found myself walking alongside Archero for a while, and he told me something that stuck with me. He said that for years, Mexican football fans had carried this quiet anxiety into every World Cup, a fear that no matter how good the team looked on paper, something would go wrong in the biggest moments. The 2010 opener had been part of that pattern. This match, he said, didn't just give Mexico 3 points, it gave them belief. Tonight, he said, we don't think about the curse anymore. Tonight we believe. I thought about that as I made my way back to my hotel, weaving through crowds that showed no signs of thinning even hours after the final whistle. I thought about Quiñones, about his early goal and his near miss off the post. I thought about Sithol's red card, and how one moment of desperation had changed the entire shape of the match. And mostly, I thought about Raúl Jiménez, about a man who 6 years ago had been fighting for his life and his career. Standing on a football pitch in his home country, scoring his first World Cup goal, crying tears that an entire stadium understood without needing a single word of explanation. As the dust settled on day one, the broader picture of this World Cup started coming into focus. This wasn't just Mexico's story. It was the opening chapter of a tournament unlike any before it. For the first time ever, 48 teams were competing, spread across 3 host nations, the USA, Mexico, and Canada, with the USA hosting the lion's share of matches, including everything from the quarterfinals onward. Mexico and Canada each got their share of the spotlight too, with their own opening ceremonies still to come. Toronto before Canada's match against Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Los Angeles before the USA's clash with Paraguay. The format itself had changed dramatically too. Gone were the days of going straight from the group stage to a round of 16. Now, for the first time in World Cup history, there would be a round of 32, an entirely new stage of the competition, created specifically because of the expanded format. Every group winner, every runner-up, and the 8 best third-place teams would advance. The permutations alone were going to keep football fans arguing for weeks. But on day one, none of that mattered as much as what had happened on the pitch in Mexico City. Later that same day, South Korea and Czechia played out their own drama in Guadalajara, with South Korea coming from behind to win 2-1 thanks to a late goal. It was a fitting complement to the chaos in the capital, a reminder that this tournament, from its very first day, was going to be unpredictable. That night, lying in my hotel bed unable to sleep, partly from the adrenaline, partly from the noise still drifting up from the streets below, I found myself thinking about why this match had affected me so deeply, even as someone with no personal connection to Mexico or South Africa. I think it's because football, at its best, isn't really about the 90 minutes. It's about everything those 90 minutes represent. For Mexico, this match represented the end of a 16-year wait, a chance to rewrite history in the most symbolic way possible. Against the same opponent, in the same stadium, at the start of a tournament they were co-hosting in front of their own people. For Raúl Jiménez, it represented something even more personal, a return from the brink, a moment that no amount of money or fame could buy, only years of recovery, persistence, and faith. And for South Africa, even in defeat, even amid the chaos of 2 red cards and a 2-0 loss, there was something there too. A team that, 16 years after hosting their own World Cup, were back on the biggest stage taking part in history once again, even if this particular chapter didn't go their way. I thought about the opening ceremony too, about Shakira's voice cutting through the noise, about Andrea Bocelli's unexpected stillness, about Salma Hayek's surprise appearance, about Leela Downs welcoming the world in indigenous languages that predate the stadium, predate the sport, predate the country itself in its current form. All of that, the music, the history, the tears, the red cards, the goals, the curse finally broken, all of it happened in a single afternoon, in a single stadium, at the start of a tournament that still had 103 more matches to go. I've covered football matches before. I've watched World Cups on television, screaming at my couch, surrounded by friends and snacks and the comfortable distance of a screen. But nothing compares to being inside the stadium when history happens. When Quiñones' shot hit the net in the 9th minute, I felt it in my chest before my brain even processed what had happened. When Jimenez's header crossed the line, I watched a 35-year-old man's life story flash across a stadium screen in real time, and I cried right along with him, surrounded by 87,000 strangers who somehow felt like family for those 90 minutes. When the third red card was shown and disbelief rippled through the crowd, I laughed, genuinely laughed at the sheer absurdity of what I was witnessing, while simultaneously knowing I was watching World Cup history unfold. Mexico won their first-ever World Cup opener. They beat the team that had denied them in 2010. They did it at Estadio Azteca, a stadium now etched into history as the only one to host matches across 3 different men's World Cups. They did it with their home crowd roaring behind them. With global superstars setting the stage beforehand and with a script so dramatic, 3 red cards, an emotional return from injury goal, a curse broken after 16 years, that if you'd written it as fiction people would have called it unrealistic. But it wasn't fiction. I was there. I saw it. I felt it. And as I finally drifted off to sleep that night with the sound of distant celebrations still echoing through the streets of Mexico City, I knew one thing for certain. The 2026 World Cup had only just begun. And it had already given us a story we'd be talking about for years. If you weren't there, I hope this gave you even a fraction of what it felt like. And if you were, wherever you were watching from, I hope it brought back that same feeling. The noise, the emotion, the chaos, and the history. This is just match 1 of 104. Buckle up.